The sky above New Gettysburg burned. What had once been a vibrant colony, a testament to humanity's resilience, was now a smoldering battlefield. The Galactic Empire's warships hung in low orbit, their plasma batteries carving molten scars across the planet's surface. Buildings crumbled under the relentless bombardment, entire city blocks reduced to nothing but dust and wreckage. The invaders had come in force, confident that Earth's fledgling outer colonies could never mount an effective resistance. So far, they had been right. Inside Fort Liberty, the last bastion of human defense, Colonel Jack Harlow stood with his arms crossed, his face carved from years of combat. The flickering glow of the tactical map illuminated his weathered features, deep lines set in a permanent scowl. Around him, the command room buzzed with tension. Officers barked out fragmented reports, men pored over damage assessments, and the occasional distant explosion sent dust trickling from the ceiling. They were losing. Harlow exhaled through his nose, eyes locked on the screen that showed their grim reality. The fortress was surrounded. Empire dropships were descending in waves, unloading towering Karnak-class walkers, their plasma turrets carving through any human resistance left outside the walls. Infantry units, clad in shimmering energy armor, advanced with a mechanical precision that made them seem more like machines than living soldiers. The enemy was relentless, methodical, and armed with technology centuries ahead of anything humanity had fielded in this war. "Sir," a voice cut through the chaos. Harlow turned. Lieutenant Marcus Deuce Donovan, an artillery specialist and combat veteran, stood with his helmet tucked under one arm. His face was smeared with sweat and dirt, his uniform tattered from battle. But there was a fire in his eyes, an edge that came only from men who refused to surrender, even when common sense dictated otherwise. "We're down to our last munition stockpile," Donovan said, jaw tight. "What we've got left isn't enough to hold the fort. They'll overrun us within the day." Harlow didn't flinch. He already knew the numbers, already understood the brutal arithmetic of war. "What do you suggest, Lieutenant?" Donovan hesitated for only a second. "We use the museum piece." Silence fell around them. The few men within earshot turned, exchanging wary glances. Everyone knew what he meant. "Jesus Christ, Donovan," growled Sergeant Ethan Cole, an explosives expert with a reputation for never backing down from a fight. "That thing's a relic. A damn antique." "That antique is the last working artillery piece on this rock," Donovan shot back. "And right now we need firepower. I don't give a damn how old it is. If it still fires, we use it." Harlow ran a hand over his stubbled jaw. The M777 Howitzer had been a museum exhibit, a remnant of Earth's old wars before humanity had ever dreamed of reaching the stars. It had been preserved for history, a symbol of an age long past. Nobody had considered it an actual weapon. Not until now. "You're telling me," Harlow said slowly, "that a gun designed centuries ago is going to stop an empire that considers our best weapons primitive?" "Sir, with respect, that's exactly what I'm saying." A dry chuckle came from Captain Ryan Holt, an engineer who had spent most of the war keeping outdated tech running longer than it should. "Hell, I've worked with worse. If Deuce can make it bark, I can make sure it doesn't blow up in our faces." Harlow exhaled. His gaze flicked to the monitors again. The Karnak-class walkers were moving closer. Their plasma weapons could melt through the fort's defenses in minutes once they reached optimal range. They were out of options. "Get that damn gun operational," Harlow said finally. The team didn't waste a second. The Howitzer had been collecting dust in an old armory, a historical curiosity rather than an instrument of war. But as Donovan ran his hand over its barrel, he felt something deeper, something elemental. The simplicity of its design, the brutal efficiency of its firepower, the sheer audacity of trying to use it against an empire that saw humanity as nothing more than an inconvenience. Holt and his engineers set to work immediately. The hydraulics were a mess, and the targeting system had to be manually adjusted, but the core mechanics were sound. More importantly, it was built for kinetic destruction, something the Empire had never prioritized in its warfare. The aliens relied on energy weapons, shields calibrated to dissipate plasma and lasers. But a 155 high-explosive shell moving at supersonic speeds? That was a problem they hadn't accounted for. While Holt's team prepped the gun, Sergeant Cole and his demolition crew scoured the fort's remaining stockpiles, salvaging what they could. Standard artillery shells wouldn't cut it. They needed something that could punch through shields, tear through armor, and leave the enemy bleeding. Cole inspected a crate of depleted uranium, rounds meant for heavy Gauss rifles. "Think we can make these fit?" Donovan grinned. "We're about to find out." The work was dirty, rushed, and dangerously experimental. But hours later, as the first Karnak-class Walker reached the outer perimeter of Fort Liberty, the Howitzer was ready. "Load it up," Donovan ordered. Cole slammed a modified shell into the chamber. Holt adjusted the targeting parameters, his fingers flying over an ancient mechanical console. "Ready." Harlow watched the screen, hard hammering. The alien Walker loomed, a hulking monstrosity of alien engineering, its plasma cannon glowing as it charged for a devastating strike. "Fire!" The Howitzer roared. The ground trembled as the first round screamed through the air, a brutal relic of old world warfare unleashed upon an empire that had never once feared humanity's past. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. The shell struck the Walker's forward shield, and for a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the shield collapsed. The tungsten uranium penetrator slammed through the Walker's torso, detonating inside its core. The towering machine buckled, sparks vomiting from its ruptured systems, before toppling in a thunderous explosion. The command room erupted in stunned silence. Then cheers. "Son of a bitch," Holt whispered. "It actually worked." Harlow didn't smile. His gaze shifted back to the screens, where more Walkers advanced, dropships descending like steel locusts. The Empire wasn't going to back down. Not yet. He turned to his men. "Load the next round." The battle for New Gettysburg was far from over, but for the first time since the invasion began, the Americans had drawn blood. And if there was one thing history had proven time and again, it was that once an American fight started, it didn't end until the enemy was on its knees. The Howitzer's barrel still smoked from its last shot when the next wave of Karnak-class Walkers advanced. Their towering forms, each a mechanical beast bristling with plasma cannons and reinforced armor, moved with terrifying precision. But now, they weren't advancing with unchecked arrogance. They were scanning, recalibrating, adapting. The Galactic Empire had just learned that humans were still dangerous. Colonel Harlow stood over the tactical map, jaw clenched. The first kill had been a message, but the fight was far from one. The enemy's orbital fleet had begun coordinating new attack patterns, using synchronized bombardments to cut off any potential retreat. Empire forces weren't going to make the same mistake twice. "We got their attention," said Donovan, slamming another round into the Howitzer's breech. "Now we need to keep them guessing." Captain Holt wiped a layer of sweat from his brow, his hands blackened with grease from modifying the old artillery piece. "That last shot worked, but we were lucky. The moment they adjust their shield harmonics, we're back to square one." Harlow turned to Sergeant Cole, who was already running calculations in his head. "How long before they adapt?" "They're already trying," Cole said, nodding toward the holographic display. Alien shield frequencies flickered across the screen, shifting between different wavelengths. "If we keep firing the same rounds, they'll compensate within the next few engagements. We need something stronger, something they can't just reconfigure against." A moment of silence fell between the men. Then Holt exhaled sharply, his fingers snapping as an idea took root. "Rocket-assisted shells." Donovan raised a brow. "You got some stashed away I don't know about." "Better." Holt gestured for them to follow. They hurried through the smoke-filled corridors of Fort Liberty, deeper into the ammunition depot. The place was a mess, half the stockpiles destroyed, racks of weapons overturned, but there were still hidden treasures beneath the wreckage. Holt led them to a rusted storage container, its faded markings barely visible under centuries of dust. He pried it open, revealing long, sleek rocket-assisted artillery shells stacked neatly inside. Their dull metallic casings had once been cutting-edge tech during Earth's wars of the 21st century. Now, they might be the key to winning a war centuries beyond their intended design. These were meant for extended-range strikes, Holt explained. They've got internal propulsion, which means they don't just rely on the gun's power. If we modify them, we can push the payload harder, faster, and deadlier. Donovan finished, already grinning. Cole crouched beside one of the shells, running his hand along the casing. We can tweak the warheads, too. Add depleted uranium, tungsten cores, hell, even an EMP charge if we can rig one. Harlow nodded. Make it happen. For hours, they worked with the precision of men who understood that failure meant death. Holt and his engineers stripped the old artillery rounds down to their bare essentials, rewiring propulsion systems and adjusting guidance controls. Cole's team reinforced the warheads, packing them with a cocktail of dense metal penetrators and high-yield explosives. Each round would hit with the force of a small missile, enough to punch through shields, armor, and anything unlucky enough to be on the other side. Outside, the fortress trembled as another impact rocked the structure. The Empire's forces were preparing for their next assault. Alien dropships screamed overhead, their engines howling against the stormy sky. Karnak walkers adjusted their formations, no longer moving in tight-knit clusters, but spreading out, forcing the humans to pick their targets carefully. Donovan climbed back into the gunner's seat, adjusting the targeting parameters. Let's see how they like this. The modified Howitzer barked fire and steel, launching the first rocket-assisted shell at supersonic speeds. The round sliced through the air, its internal thrusters igniting as it homed in on its target. The Karnak walker tried to adjust, its energy shield flickering as it attempted to compensate. But the shell hit faster than the Empire could react. The explosion sent shock waves through the battlefield. The walker didn't just collapse. It detonated from within, its core systems ruptured by the sheer kinetic force. Alien infantry were flung through the air, their energy armor offering no protection against the raw brutality of the impact. The room erupted with cheers. Even the battle-hardened Harlow cracked the barest hint of a grin. They can't compensate fast enough, Holt said, watching as another modified shell obliterated a second walker. Their tech is advanced, but they've never fought something like this before. The enemy, however, wasn't finished. The Empire's command structure moved swiftly, deploying airborne SDRYPH-class bombers, sleek, crescent-shaped war machines designed to level entire battlefields. Their plasma payloads glowed a sickly green, promising annihilation. Harlow saw them approaching on the display. If those bombers hit us, this fight's over. We don't have anti-air defenses strong enough, Donovan muttered. Cole cracked his knuckles. Then we turned the Howitzer into one. They worked fast. Holt adjusted the targeting software, rewriting its parameters to track aerial movements. Donovan ran the calculations, recalibrating the angles to hit fast-moving targets. It was insane. No artillery had ever been designed to take down bombers mid-flight, but nothing about this war had followed the rules. The first bomber swooped low, plasma batteries spitting fire toward the fortress. Donovan tracked its movement, waiting for the perfect angle. Come on, come on. He fired. The Howitzer recoiled, the modified shell spiraling toward the sky, its thrusters burning bright. The bomber's pilot barely had time to react before the round punched through its fuselage, exploding deep within its core. The war machine came apart in a cascade of fire and debris, its remains raining across the battlefield below. A second bomber moved to retaliate, but the Americans were already adjusting, already compensating. Another round screamed into the heavens, and another alien warship met its fiery demise. The battlefield, once a scene of impending doom, now tilted in humanity's favor. The Empire's forces hesitated for the first time. Their invincible war machines had proven fallible. Their fleets, once untouchable, now had to consider the possibility of annihilation from a weapon they had mocked. But Harlow knew the fight wasn't over. The Empire would adapt, just as humanity had. They would escalate. He could feel it in his bones. As his men reloaded the Howitzer and reinforced their defenses, he turned his gaze toward the sky, where the Empire's fleet still loomed. "They underestimated us once," he said, his voice a quiet promise. "Let's make sure they never do it again." The battlefield reeked of scorched metal and burning flesh. The wreckage of Karnak walkers lay strewn across the ruins of New Gettysburg, their once imposing forms reduced to smoldering husks. Smoke curled into the sky, mixing with the dust kicked up by relentless bombardment. The SDRYPH bombers had been driven back, their charred remains scattered across the rocky plains. But the Galactic Empire was far from finished. Inside Fort Liberty, Colonel Harlow paced the command center, his boots grinding against the floor as he studied the tactical display. The enemy's ground forces had stalled, their infantry and armor hesitant after suffering catastrophic losses, but that hesitation wouldn't last. The Empire was an unrelenting machine, and when brute force failed, it always turned to something worse. "They're shifting strategies," Harlow muttered, eyes narrowing at the shifting enemy formations. The alien ground troops weren't advancing as expected. Instead, they were consolidating, pulling back toward the outer perimeter and forming defensive lines, something they hadn't done before. Captain Holt leaned over the console, his fingers dancing over the interface. "They're up to something," he murmured. "They don't retreat unless they're setting the stage for something bigger." Sergeant Cole stepped into the room, a deep frown creasing his dust-covered face. "I don't like it. Feels like they're baiting us into thinking we've won this round." Lieutenant Donovan leaned against the Howitzer, wiping grime from his hands. "If they're holding position, that means they're waiting for something. Reinforcements? Airstrike." A sharp beeping interrupted the conversation. A comms officer spun in his chair, panic flashing across his face. "Sir, massive energy spike detected, orbital origin." Harlow's head snapped toward the holographic display. A new marker had appeared above the planet, descending fast. "Orbital deployment," Holt muttered. "And not just dropships. That's something else." The sky split open. A beam of crackling energy lanced down from the heavens, carving a fiery scar across the landscape. The ground exploded in a blinding eruption of molten rock, vaporizing everything caught in its path. The sheer force of the impact sent shockwaves rolling across the battlefield, toppling structures and hurling debris in every direction. Then, through the smoke and dust, they saw it. A Titan-class siege mech. The alien war machine was unlike anything they had faced before. 60 feet of reinforced alloy plating, draped in shimmering energy barriers, its quadrupedal frame bristling with plasma cannons and kinetic disruptors. It moved with terrifying grace, each step shaking the earth beneath it. The Empire had stopped playing games. This was annihilation made manifest. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the hardened veterans of Fort Liberty felt the weight of impending doom pressing down on them. Donovan was the first to break the silence. "That is a problem." Harlow's mind worked fast. The Howitzer had been a game-changer against walkers and bombers, but this was different. The Titan wasn't just shielded. It was armored beyond anything conventional weaponry could penetrate. Sergeant Cole exhaled sharply. "We don't have a round big enough to crack that thing." Holt, still staring at the monstrous war machine, suddenly stiffened. "Maybe we do." All eyes turned to him. "Explain," Harlow ordered. Holt grabbed a tablet and began pulling up old schematics, his fingers moving fast. "We've been modifying these rounds to punch through shields and armor, right? But what if we detonated a round inside the shield itself?" Donovan frowned. "How do you fire through a shield?" "You don't," Holt said. "You get under it." He pulled up an old blueprint of an M982 Excalibur round, a guided artillery shell originally designed for pinpoint accuracy. "This thing was made to correct its trajectory mid-flight. We modify one with an advanced EMP payload, adjust its approach angle, and fire it just ahead of the Titan." Cole caught on immediately. If we angle the shot right, the shell doesn't just hit. It buries itself under the Titan before detonating. Donovan whistled low. You're talking about knocking out its shield before we take the kill shot. Harlow crossed his arms, weighing the idea. It was risky. Shields were designed to deflect attacks, not let them through. But if they could disrupt the Titan's defense long enough to fire a direct round at its core, it was their only shot. Make the modifications, Harlow ordered. We take it down, or we die trying. The team worked with desperate precision. Holt and his engineers reprogrammed the Excalibur shell's guidance system, adjusting its trajectory to dip beneath the Titan's shield. Cole and his demolition crew wired the EMP charge, rigging it for maximum disruption. Meanwhile, Donovan calibrated the Howitzer, adjusting the firing arc for the most unpredictable angle possible. Outside, the Titan's weapons began to charge. The air hummed with raw energy as its plasma cannons, primed for a devastating blast. They were seconds away from total obliteration. Now or never. Holt shouted. Donovan fired. The modified shell cut through the air, its guidance thrusters kicking in as it adjusted course. The Titan's targeting systems locked onto it, but the shell was moving too fast, too erratic. It dove sharply, passing underneath the massive war machine just before detonation. A shock wave of electromagnetic force erupted from below. The Titan's shields flickered, stuttered, then collapsed. The fortress erupted in cheers, but there was no time to celebrate. Reload. Now. Harlow bellowed. Cole slammed the final round into the Howitzer's breech. A massive, tungsten-core sabot shell, designed for one purpose only, destruction. Donovan adjusted his sights. The Titan's armor was thick, but without its shield, it was vulnerable. One shot, he muttered. Make it count. He fired. The shell shrieked across the battlefield, its reinforced core punching straight into the Titan's central power unit. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the Titan exploded. The detonation ripped through the battlefield, sending shockwaves that flattened everything within 100 meters. Alien infantry scrambled for cover, their morale shattered as their strongest war machine was torn apart by a centuries-old weapon. Inside the command center, Harlow finally allowed himself a grim smile. They should have studied history, he muttered. The battlefield had gone silent. The Empire's forces were staggering, uncertain, for the first time. They feared humanity. But Harlow knew better than to think the fight was over. The Empire had taken a devastating blow, but they wouldn't retreat without a final act of vengeance. And as he stared at the orbital fleet still looming overhead, he knew exactly what was coming next. The battlefield lay in eerie silence, the wreckage of the Titan-class siege mech still smoldering amid the ruins. But Colonel Harlow wasn't fooled by the quiet. The Galactic Empire never accepted defeat easily. He turned his gaze skyward, toward the monstrous fleet still hovering in the upper atmosphere, its dark silhouette blotting out the stars. The real fight wasn't over. Inside Fort Liberty's command center, Captain Holt was already scanning enemy movements. His fingers flew over the console, pulling up tactical readouts. More energy spikes. More movement. Asterisk asterisk, the Empire wasn't just regrouping. They were preparing for something worse. Colonel, Holt said, voice tight with urgency. We've got incoming. Not ground forces this time. The holomap flickered as new signals registered. Orbital bombardment platforms were shifting position, aligning for a planetary-scale strike. The Empire had lost on the ground, so now they were going to wipe the board clean. Sergeant Cole muttered a curse. They're going to glass the damn battlefield. Lieutenant Donovan clenched his jaw. They can't beat us, so they'll turn the whole planet into a graveyard. Harlow exhaled slowly. The Empire's strategy was clear. Scorched earth. No survivors, asterisk asterisk. He turned to the team. We're not going to let that happen. Holt frowned. Colonel, we don't have orbital defenses. Not a single missile left in our launchers. We can't hit them from down here. Harlow's expression was grim but unwavering. We don't need missiles. We have something better. The men exchanged uncertain glances. A howitzer wasn't designed for space combat. It wasn't meant to take down capital ships. But Harlow had spent his career fighting against impossible odds, and he knew one thing: improvisation won wars. He motioned for Holt to pull up data on the fleet's orbital position. The Empire's main battlecruiser, the Ravager, sat directly above them, coordinating the attack. It was massive, an armored behemoth bristling with weaponry, but it had one weakness. Right there, Harlow said, pointing at the display. The heat exhaust vents. That's where they dissipate energy from their main reactors. Cole rubbed his chin. You're thinking what I think you're thinking. Harlow nodded. If we fire an Excalibur round, modified for high-altitude trajectory, we can send a shell straight into that vent, detonate the power core from the inside. Donovan's eyebrows shot up. Colonel, that's a damn near impossible shot. Holt smirked. Good thing impossible is what we do best. The team moved fast. They had one shot at this, and every second they wasted brought the orbital strike closer. A single Excalibur round was prepped, its guidance system overhauled for extreme range targeting. The shell was fitted with a modified fusion charge, enough to ignite the Ravager's core in a cataclysmic chain reaction. Harlow climbed onto the firing platform, gripping the howitzer's controls. The barrel tilted skyward, its trajectory calculator struggling to adjust for a target in low orbit. The men worked furiously, adjusting angles, recalibrating systems, making last-second tweaks. Outside, the sky was turning red. The Empire's bombardment sequence had begun. Flashes of energy gathered across the warships as their cannons primed for planetary annihilation. Cole yelled over the noise. Colonel, they're charging their weapons. Harlow's breathing slowed. The wind howled through the shattered remains of the fortress. His hands tightened on the controls. The digital targeting locked on. One shot. He pulled the trigger. The howitzer roared, the Excalibur round screaming into the sky. It ripped through the atmosphere, breaking the sound barrier as it climbed higher and higher. The Ravager's automated defenses detected the incoming projectile, turrets swiveling to intercept. Plasma bursts erupted in the upper atmosphere, trying to swat the shell out of the sky. But the Excalibur was too fast. It veered, corrected, dipped, then surged upward at the perfect angle. The vent loomed ahead, glowing from the heat of the reactor core inside. Then, impact, The round punched through the vent, embedding itself deep inside the ship. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sky caught fire. The Ravager shuddered, its hull splitting apart as a chain reaction tore through its reactor. Flames erupted from its seams, energy surging outward in a violent cascade. The entire warship began to collapse, its enormous structure buckling under the force of the explosion. The remaining Empire fleet scrambled, their systems thrown into disarray as the flagship ruptured and detonated. A brilliant fireball erupted in the heavens, the shockwave ripping through the sky, shattering the formation of enemy warships. On the ground, the soldiers of Fort Liberty watched in awe as the impossible happened. The howitzer had just destroyed an orbiting capital ship. Silence hung over the battlefield. The Empire's surviving vessels hesitated. Their command ship was gone. Their ground forces were decimated. And worst of all, they had just been beaten by ancient Earth artillery. Then, the retreat began. One by one, the remaining warships broke formation, their engines flaring as they began pulling away from the planet. Without a leader, without a plan, they knew they had lost. Cheers erupted across Fort Liberty. Soldiers roared in victory, clapping each other on the back, laughing in disbelief. Cole wiped sweat from his brow. I can't believe that worked. Holt chuckled. Guess they should have respected old-school firepower. Harlow exhaled, watching the remnants of the fleet disappear into the void. The Empire had been humbled. The most advanced war machine in the galaxy had just been shattered by human ingenuity, grit, and an old howitzer. But he knew this wasn't the end. The Empire wouldn't forget this defeat. They'd be back, stronger, angrier. And when they returned, humanity would be ready.